My family's been here since the 50s or so, since my grandfather came here as a door-to-door salesman and have been settled here ever since. And growing up, you're wondering, like, obviously the question you get given is what you can do when you're older. Given my father is a doctor and I am of South Asian descent, the common thing is, oh, I can't become a doctor. All my mammals, my grandmother, they would say, oh, I can become a doctor when he's older. And I decided to think, is there anything else I could do apart from this? And it kind of came down to the question that, what does a doctor do? A doctor's out there to help people, They treat you when you're ill, they help save your life when it's in critical danger, and so on and so forth. And it also comes with, a deal of great respect as well. But primarily is also the helping part as well when it comes to being a doctor. And that's the part I was interested in, but I was thinking, am I helping people most when I am a doctor, Because at the end of the day, thankfully we do have the system with the NHS in this country where, if you need to get treated, you will get treated. And I decided to take a look back at my own life and realise I'm actually quite privileged in terms of my father was a doctor, so I was able to live a fairly comfortable upbringing. But I know those around me weren't so privileged as well. Like, for example, my mother's side of the family all used to work at Goodyear's, and so like my nanu and all three of my mums all used to work there. And then since that has now closed, unfortunately, along with a lot of other manufacturing jobs in Wolverhampton, the economic situation hasn't been as good as it used to be. Whereas the contrast to my life, where I had a lot more opportunities per se, as opposed to my cousins who probably didn't. And the question I wanted to answer per se, was like, how could you go about solving this, Because if you're able to get people around you more, not privileged, as in, what's the word I'm looking for? More opportunities in life, per se, If you're able to provide those around more opportunity, they can enjoy life more. So that's kind of the question I wanted to answer, essentially. So obviously when it comes to jobs and all that, it's all centered around the economy and so on. Like when I was just starting secondary school, the 2008 financial crisis just happened. So it was like, I found that quite interesting because to be honest, we didn't really feel it that much in my own household, but like you'll see it on the news a lot, and so it's something that like I was quite interested in, and so it's something I want to read a lot more about. And then I was thinking like, so how can I go about answering this question? So I had always been very good at maths from like a young age. Not to toot my own trumpet, but like something that I take pride in. Like I've always been good at it, and it's something that I want to strive to get better at as well. And how can you use that to help other people? And so I came to the logical conclusion then, let's study both maths and economics. So maths and economics was kind of what I wanted to go and study afterwards. So this was coming to the end of like when I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels. So you choose your A-level results, subjects for example. And I remember I was choosing maths, further maths, chemistry and physics, I think. But I remember my parents were still kind of keen on me doing medicine at the time. And so they said, now keep your options open, do biology as well, just in case you do want to change your mind. And I kind of came to the realisation that later on, especially when I was over summer as well, before you do your A-levels, I felt I wasn't going to go down the medicine route in the first place. So I felt there's no point me studying biology if it's something I didn't enjoy studying anyway. And so it took a bit of time to settle in, but I came up with my own research, because my parents were like, oh, if you do medicine, you get a stable job and you'll be sorted afterwards. But I basically researched as well that like I can also get an equally stable job as well if I just study maths and econ. And so they came to an understanding, and so yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to study afterwards. And then the question became, obviously, so now I want to study this, what do I need to do to go about studying it? So obviously I was reading books anyway at quite a rapid rate as it was. Like I've always been a keen book reader, even when it comes to non-fiction books. So I was always quite well read on the topic. And also just trying to expand my horizons more so. So when it came to deciding what university I wanted to go to, like I hadn't really considered universities beyond the local ones, to be honest. So I think like Birmingham, maybe Warwick was the furthest I was going to go, because a lot of my family hadn't gone that far for university, and so at school, thankfully my school had quite good resources, so we could see what other universities there were out there. And you had like places all down in London. We had up north as well. There were plenty of unis as well. That were quite good. And my school actually encouraged me to actually apply to Cambridge as well, which was something I never really backed myself to do. But they said, no, you probably have the ability to try and do so. So yeah, I also applied there as well when going to applying for university, and I did end up applying to somewhere in London. It's called the London School of Economics, or LSE. It's a university that I actually hadn't heard of until I was like 17, where a close family friend of ours was going there and studying like maths and stats there. So something very similar to what I wanted to study. But yeah, it's something that I just hadn't heard of. And I remember when I was looking up this university, it was like, I think like third or fourth best university in the whole country, and I was quite surprised that I just hadn't heard of it. So I remember going there like on my open day in lower six, and to be honest, I wasn't really impressed by it. Because when I thought of university, I thought of like a big campus where you go out and you hang out there. Whereas this was kind of just bang in the centre of London. And it didn't really have much of a university feel. It just felt like a cluster of buildings clustered together. And it's a bit, it didn't really go with my perception of university. So like, because I think at the time I had my heart set on like going to Warwick, for example. Because that was like the first kind of university, I knew that I did maths quite well. And so in my mind, I was going to go there essentially. So then it comes around to like upper six, and then when you've sent my university applications out and I start getting my offers through. So I get Warwick, I then get like Nottingham, Exeter, and a few other ones I applied to as well. And then LSE also sent me an offer as well, but at the time as well, I still think, okay, I'm still probably going to go for Warwick. And then out of the blue, I somehow managed to get a interview offer from Cambridge, which was something I didn't even expect. Like, I expected to just get a straight rejection from there. So I was quite excited to get my interview there, and unfortunately, it didn't go too well. I actually had So the process of my interview was like, we had a test when on one day, and then the second day I had a second interview where I'll go over the test and be asked several questions as well. The test itself wasn't too bad, and you get to stay the night in Cambridge, which was quite nice. And then when it came to my actual interview, I remember I somehow got an argument with my own interviewer, which I do not recommend. If an interviewer is telling you something's correct, say it's correct. They probably know more than you. And I think it's comes to do with, there's a curve they asked me to sketch, and it was in fact a square, but like I kept insisting that it had slightly round off corner, so it wasn't a square. It's a very minute argument, but somehow that derailed my whole interview essentially. So yeah, looking back on it, I kind of laugh on it, but yeah, at the time I was quite distraught. But in the end, I was quite happy that I got that far in the first place. Getting interview is not an easy feat, so I'll take that as it is. And so then it came to choosing where I wanted to go to. So back then I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Warwick and then choose LSE as my reserve option. And I remember then telling other people as well, so I was speaking to like family, friends and so on, and people tell me, are you silly? Like, why are you putting LSE as your reserve? Like, Warwick's so much, LSE is so much better than Warwick. And so then I had to think about it again. Okay, so what should I choose? So I then visited both universities again, and again, Warwick still impressed me because it's kind of what I expected it to be. But this I went to LSE, it kind of dawned on me as well, like that you were just in the city of London, and London is very contrasting to Wolverhampton. Like it's a lot more busier. There's a lot more things there, and I felt like going to London as well, you could probably learn a lot more as well. And this kind of came to the decision I had to make. Okay. So, do I want to go to Warwick or do I want to go to LSE? And I kept this decision on and on for ages. I think it was not until like May, so like essentially like the deadline for UCAS, where you decide that it came down to, I wrote down all the pros and cons of both universities, and eventually I decided to go to London. Like, even though I felt that Warwick was more of an academic institution, which is what I'm more interested in, I felt by going to LSE and in turn London, I'd go and learn a lot more as well, and that I could kind of then use that essentially what my original goal was, like help Wolverhampton in a way, and learn more about the economy as well and how it functions. So I felt like being in London will help me with that, and also just help me grow as a person as well, because I've always been quite a quiet guy. So I think like just being there would help me open up as well and help me develop as a person. So yeah, so I kind of chose LSE more so because it was only London University I applied to as well, because I was not initially keen on going to London either, and so LSE was a place I did end up going to, and yeah, so I then ended up going to LSE in the year of 2015, which is now 7 years ago, and it feels not that long ago, but it's it's kind of crazy how long ago it was and how time flies. So yeah, 2015, I began my journey there. So I remember going to London for the first time, and so not for the first time, but like first time for university. So my parents dropped me off for my accommodation, and yeah, you kind of just left to your own devices, which is very interesting. So the first thing I noticed about London was it's expensive there. So I didn't have that much money when I was living in London, unfortunately, and so it did make me. Was my parents call me gunjuice, so they say it may be a bit cheap, but you got to learn to adapt as well. Like you can't always treat yourself to everything in London, obviously because it's quite an expensive city to live in. But you can still enjoy yourself even though you're not on a large budget either. And so initially, one thing I found there is that it was kind of exciting, but also quite isolating as well. So London's very busy, but you can also feel quite lonely. And I think one part of that was because when I first started university, coming from Wolverhampton, there weren't that many people like me. So the majority of people who do go to like universities in London are primarily like international students or people who primarily come from like private schools. And people from London in general, there weren't many people from outside of London, I found. And I'm not sure, like, it's a bit jarring, it feels. But what I felt like is that, like, I didn't feel I had much in common with those around me, unfortunately. Like, I didn't manage to make friends, I still have good friends from uni, but they weren't quite of the same background as myself from being from home. So it took a bit of a while to kind of settle down, I feel. And one thing I realised that I didn't realise initially about LSE is that LSE, the reason that it has such a good reputation is that it's very good at funding out people who work in the corporate world. So people who work in banking and consulting and all this, right? And so this wasn't actually my aim when coming to university. Yeah, like people said, oh, you're going to do maths and econ, you're going to earn a lot of money. But I didn't really know like how or what I was going to do. And then suddenly you kind of thrown into it and everyone there seemed to know what they were doing. Like, well, not everyone does, obviously. Because obviously it tends to be a vocal minority that actually knows what they're doing. Most people kind of just get dumped in there like yourself. But like, in general, that's what the motivation was. As I say, like my original motivation wasn't really that, because like I enjoy studying maths and I kind of wanted to make a difference to those around me. And doing that through like say banking or consulting wasn't kind of how I envisioned it. But then, then I kind of had to get into the whole hype train of it all. So initially, when you want to apply to these kind of firms, you do things called like internships and so on, and try and get work experience while you're at university. And at LSE, it makes you like a machine in a way, applying for these jobs. Like, people are on it from like the first few weeks of term, or even before as well. Like in the summer of like your second year, people are already applying to internships for the following year. So, and it ends up creating a bit of a weird atmosphere as well, because obviously like you go to university, you go to learn, but it felt everyone's focus was kind of what comes after university, and you kind of have to adapt to it as well. And it's something I struggled with when I went to uni, because I began like applying to jobs kind of for the sake of it, like doing internship applications because that's what everyone was doing. But like often, like when you do these job applications, you then get asked, "Okay, what do you want to do? Like, why do you want this role?" And it's always a question of why I struggle to answer, because like I don't know why I want this role. I just want to get some experience. It's not like I particularly want this role. There's nothing particularly selling me on it. So I remember I would start applications and just kind of lead them unfinished. So I remember like in my second year, for example, I made a note. I kept track of what I was doing. And I think I applied to like about 40, 50 places. I started applications, but I think I only sent up like 5 or 6 of them in the end. And so, yeah, it was kind of annoying like that, because I didn't really have that motivation. And so I think one motivation I did begin to get was more so in research and like so academic kind of things. So like I was kind of said like, okay, after I've done my undergrad, I'm going to do a master's. So I was not too keen, like I was not, getting a job after uni was not like a big priority of mine per se. And so, like, do a master's and maybe do a PhD as well and do some research in something that I'm interested in. Say, for example, what my general motivation. So, trying to get, whilst at university events, trying to get, like, my mind back on focus. So, I got myself involved in, like, extracurricular stuff there. So I'd always been, even at school as well, I'd always been quite keen on extracurricular stuff. So, for example, when I was at school, we had a house system at my school, so I was very involved in the house events we had. I always put my hand up for everything. I played hockey, I did cross country, play cricket. So I was always doing all these kind of things. So it's something I wanted to continue when at university as well, because I'm not someone who could just sit at a desk all day. I need to do things on the outside as well. So I still continued hockey at uni. Managed to hurt myself a lot, unfortunately, but yeah, hockey was good fun. And I also managed to join the TEDx Society at my university as well. So for those of you who don't know, so when it comes to TED, so you may have seen a TED talk on YouTube, sorry, where people talk about something vaguely inspirational, trying to spread a message. So TED is about ideas worth sharing. And so TEDx is like a subsidiary of TED, where basically anyone could organise a TEDx event in your local community. So my LSE, we had a TEDx LSE. So I joined that for my first year and eventually ended up leading the society, which is quite cool because you meet some very interesting people. Because obviously when it comes to TED Talks, it either can be a lot of waffle, where someone says a lot of nothings, where they speak for 50 minutes but they haven't actually said anything in those 50 minutes. But you have some people who have some very interesting stories as well. So I found out quite an interesting kind of thing to keep myself organised whilst I was at university as well, because it kind of gives you your own challenges and gives you something as well outside of studying. And yeah, so I kind of did that stuff as well, and I then wanted to do more, again, research stuff. So in my second year university, I did a research project where I looked at the terror threat level in the UK. So for those of you who don't know, the UK has a terror threat level system where it's a way of signifying what's the threat level of being under a terrorist attack in the UK. And I was basically looking at the public perception of it. So I sent a series of surveys out and I interviewed people in the Met Police and TfL and someone in government, but it's quite an interesting kind of project to do because like it's kind of applying my skills on maths on like an outside kind of subject, you know, looking at a sociological, like a public policy issue as opposed to a purely like maths or econ issue. And yeah, it's obviously it's quite applicable at the time because unfortunately I was doing it in 2017, and 2017 we had some events happen in London, so that was of interest as well of the research I was doing. And so yeah, you can actually find a paper online. I think it's called like Too Little, Too Late, and it's basically how the terror threat level system is a bit pointless because all the words basically mean danger, and it's very hard to kind of differentiate between the different levels of danger. And so we recommend that probably come up with a better system as well to communicate with the public. So that was one thing I did, and another piece of research I did was with the econ department. So it was more so in development economics. So I was looking at something called sun preference. So sun preference is the preference to have a son, and so basically looking at gender inequality. And so I primarily, being of South Asian descent, I primarily looked at India and Pakistan, and so did literature review into research and that was done over there on how because the general conception is that the more economically developed you are, the more gender equality you're going to have. But you found if you looked at the regional differences in both India and Pakistan, the more like affluent areas like Punjab, for example, even though they're the more affluent areas of these countries, they aren't necessarily the most equal in terms of gender representation and so on. So it was always quite interesting to look at things like that. And so that leads me on to like what I was going to kind of do after university as well. So I was kind of a bit lost again, as say what I was going to do after university. I knew I was going to do a master's, but I was not sure exactly what I was going to do it in. So what was it, the econ side or the math side? And I found at uni I was still doing very good at the maths. So I thought, okay, let's stick to doing the maths then, and then after that I can then decide what I want to research in as well. So I applied to like applied maths at like Imperial, LSE. I think I applied to Oxford as well. I'm not sure if I did or not in the end. I remember starting an application for it, and then also to King's College London. And at the end, I did end up getting LSE offers from both King's and LSE. And LSE obviously had a high prestige. It was kind of where I was kind of told to go towards as well. And then it got to a situation over summer as well, like, do I want to stay at LSE? So I had some issues regarding my offer as well, because of some extenuating circumstances where it was initially rejected and accepted and rejected. Well, I was getting conflicting emails from LSE. So during that time, then, it gave me some time to think about it as well. So, okay, maybe I could go elsewhere. And so that's why I looked at the offer from King's. So even though King's isn't ranked as highly as LSE, you know, I found the course they're offering is quite interesting. So it's called Complex System Modelling, which is looking how different systems interact with one another. So there's still a lot of applied maths, and it's a bit different to what I'd done so far. So I thought I might as well, like, go for it. So I made my decision, like, in mid-August. They're like, okay, I'm going to go to King's. So it's not much of a change. They're literally across the road. But a change is still a change at the end of the day. So so end up going to King's. And that in itself was a lot more interesting because I think at King's people were a lot more academically driven, which is more so what I was looking for. I think when I started university, and being a bit of a nerd myself, I was surrounded by nerds as well on my master's course, so that was quite nice to have. And there wasn't as much of an emphasis on the outside world as well either. So it was interesting going to King's because obviously it was the same situation as well when I was choosing my university as well. People say, "Oh, how come you go to Warwick over LSE?" And then the same thing was here now. Like, how come you gone from LSE now to King's? And obviously, you're always going to get this, unfortunately, whatever like university you get to, because no university is technically the best. You know, what each person will kind of like brag that this university is so much better than another one. Then in end day, university is university. Like, yeah, I'd already had LSE on my CV, so like, I'd already got that prestige element out of the institution itself. So like now I could kind of move on and do something else in a way. So that's kind of why you end up going King's. Even though they get a bit of stick from some of my friends from LSE, but like that's kind of blown over now. We've gone a bit older. I realise it's a bit immature to think about it. Things like that. Maybe that are like kind of just like trivial things that you can brush off now. So yeah, at King's, so complex system modelling is basically looking how like networks interact with one another. So like one thing I became interested in was the idea of like social networks. So how people kind of interact within a network. So not just like Facebook, Twitter, but I mean like how you interact with people in the outside world and so on, and how these kind of systems kind of have impacts around you. Because that's one thing that kind of goes when I was studying like econ and maths, for example. Like we can talk a lot about economics as well, things, but obviously things are running about how networks are, you know, how things are connected and so on. So that's something that I wanted to research more so into as well. And it's kind of idea that like where I was going to the end of my master's, I was thinking, okay, what do I actually want to study now? Like what I would do, like do I actually want to go and work, or do I want to go and study more and like say for example do a PhD? When I speak with my parents about this again, they were very keen on me going to the outside world as opposed to doing a PhD. And because obviously, you know, what's the point of me just studying for longer and longer and longer? You know, you need to eventually go outside and work for a bit and stand on your own 2 feet. So I decided like, hey, I'll go work for a bit, but I'll come back and do research eventually. So that's kind of what I'm going to lead on to now. So we're approaching shortly towards the break, but essentially I made a decision, okay, I'm going to work for about a year or two outside and see where that takes me essentially. And that's been 3 years since. So after uni, I decided to go work in a media agency. So a media agency is basically a company that buys and sells advertising on behalf of a client. So that's why when I did, it's a bit of an interesting one because obviously the finance and consulting route was also there as well, and I did have offers from that route. But I decided to do something a bit different, as I say. You know, like do something a bit more outward facing. And media, you kind of see all the way around you, like advertising's everywhere, and you get to work with some pretty cool people. So yeah, I thought it'd be a good place to go and learn. And so yeah, we're approaching our break, so I'll go and talk about it then. So yeah, see you then. Okay, welcome back to Going Beyond Wolverhampton. I am Akmal Rafiq, and just before the break, I was just kind of talking about my own kind of life experiences and so on and so forth. And so before, I just talked about university and kind of my motivations going to uni and so on. And then towards the end of the segment, I was talking about what I did after university then, okay? So like, what comes afterwards. So as I said, I wanted to go into the outside world, and I ended up working in a media agency as a data scientist. So firstly, what is a data scientist? So data science is like kind of a buzzword that's thrown around a lot these days. So stuff like data science, machine learning, AI. At the end of the day, it's all just stats. So like it's basically maths with a cooler rebranding to make it sound cooler to everyone else around there. So that's what I essentially do. I do maths for my job essentially. So I build models that tell advertising companies, okay, what's my return on investment on advertising? So it sounds a bit like mundane in a sense, but it's also quite interesting as well because you get like a background insight to like when I see an advert, right, what's really happening. So general kind of thing with advertising, so you can advertise in different formats. So it's obviously you see your TV adverts, out of home advertising, so like big billboards, online advertising, so like your YouTube ads, your Google ads, and so on and so forth. And all of these form like a strategy that a company wants to form. And so what I've been doing now for the past few years is basically going to different clients and seeing, okay, what do I want to do with my advertising and how can I improve it and how can I optimize it. So for my first 4-5 months of my working career, I signed a large beauty brand that has many subsidiary brands within it. And so I did projects looking at, so for example, they had different makeup and skincare products and different campaigns they ran, and seeing how well advertising worked on each of these campaigns. It's funny because it gave me a interesting topic to talk back home, where I speak a lot back home to my parents and family, like, oh yeah, I know a lot about this makeup brand and this and so on, and got a few worried looks saying, yeah, how can you know so much about this? Like, don't worry, it's part of my job. So yeah, I got quite into that, and yeah, it's quite interesting applying again my kind of skills to this kind of industry. And then after that, so after that, I was brought onto another project where I was actually working within the public health service. So I was doing some work within civil service where we were trying to get working on the advertising there, and that I found a lot more interesting because when this project kind of started was when the COVID pandemic first hit. So this is like in 2020 March time. So I moved back home, and yeah, so working like for a public health whilst a major public health crisis happening is very interesting actually. It turns out. So yeah, I was doing some work within blood donations. So basically seeing what's it like for how efficient was the NHS at attracting new blood donations and registrations across the country. So basically, you have to find out what's the cost per registration and how can we make this more efficient. And so this was quite cool to work on for the next couple of months. And I had a lot more agency in this project, and yeah, you find I find it a lot more fulfilling as well because obviously, I didn't even like these jobs. Right, your job is basically the company's paying you money so that you can tell them how they can make more money, essentially. But this is something that was not along those lines. It's more so like it's actually like a public service that you actually need to help and ensure to get better. And so yeah, that was quite cool to work with. And to be honest, on that note, like when it comes to like just public service in general, it's something that I see myself doing in the future. Again, because that's a long term goal at the end of the day, because at the beginning of this like episode I was talking about like how I want to go about helping Wolverhampton, and I kind of see working for the service is kind of going to be that opportunity to do so. And it's something as well like a cousin of my mother, he'd always recommend that I should go work in the civil service when I was younger, and it's something that I now do see myself going and doing eventually in the future. But during this time as well, so as I mentioned before, is that I was also wondering whether I should go and do like a PhD or something like that, do more research. But then it's something that kind of dawned on me. So like I think after like 1 year working, then I kind of had an idea what I wanted to do research in. So again, it kind of my research interest is more so social networks and kind of how this links society together and how we function as well as a society. And so I kind of began applying to these kind of roles during the time. So I still continued my normal job as well. And I was applying for PhDs on the side. And eventually I was under the impression that I did get a place. So I did get a place at UCL to study again in how social networks interact with one another. So it's within like computer science, I think, and I was meant for 3 years, and after that I was done. Had no plan to stay in academia, so after that I could go and do something else. But unfortunately, so to do a PhD in the UK, so the UK is a bit different to other countries, is where you actually need to pay to do a PhD. So like it's seen as like an actual like course you do. And so in order to do a PhD like without paying, you get what's known as studentship here. And I thought I had a studentship, but unfortunately that didn't quite work out in the end. So unfortunately I didn't get funding, so I could still do the PhD project, but I had to pay for it. So I decided against doing so. So again, it kind of left like, do I go apply again for PhDs and so on? Because during that entire year, so from like September 2020 to like July 2021, I've been applying to PhDs basically every month. So I applied to places here in the UK as well as abroad in both the USA, Switzerland, Netherlands. I was quite close to actually going to Switzerland as well, actually. But in the end, I chose the London one over that. And then I didn't get a studentship, so it was kind of a punch in the gut, unfortunately, when it came to that. But yeah, so it's still something that's on my horizons, but now I think I've got to a stage where I'm getting a bit more older, and I feel like if I am going to take a break to do studying, it'd probably have to do part-time. And so yeah, I'll do part-time along my work, so I'll continue doing a job on the side, and then yeah, the job will be the main thing, and then the PhD on the side per se. So yeah, that's something that I've got to do long term. So then I kind of came to the realization, okay, I need to think about what I'm doing with my job. So yeah, I've been working as a media agency now for like over a year, but I wanted to do something slightly different. So I kind of looked at other opportunities out there. So media is what I kind of come accustomed to during my time there. So I did want to change industry, but I was not sure kind of what I wanted to change to. So I decided to stay to media, but I then ended up moving to like a media consultancy. So again, I did the same work as well, while telling people how to do better in advertising, but instead now doing it externally. So rather than working within an agency, I do it as an external consultancy. So again, it kind of gives you better kind of freedom in terms of what you can do, because often when you work within a media agency, it's kind of like marking your own homework. Like this is the work that we've done, and we're going to tell you how good it was. So obviously you kind of influence or bias to give better results than there probably should be. So working independently is a bit more nicer, and also working with a consultancy as well, you get a larger range of clients as well. So you work with a much broader scope of the role. So over the past year or so now, where I've been at this place, I've been primarily working. So today is actually my 1 year work anniversary at this place. So yeah, so I've been primarily working with like retail clients, so like FMCG or like DIY. So I know a lot about DIY now, which is honestly a bit more stereotypical for a guy to know as opposed to knowing a lot more about makeup. So yeah, so I've been doing that now for a year, and now I've kind of got more further my own technicalities and so on. I don't mind now working in another industry now. So media gives you like a nice bits and bobs of industries, but now like I want to focus on working one industry now for a few more years, and that'll kind of get me some exposure as well. So yeah, I'll see how that goes. But for now, I'm happy where I am. But yeah, if another opportunity arises, I'll go for that. And so this kind of brings me on to now, like, so we're halfway into this segment now. Why I kind of started doing this show. So as I say, like, because of the pandemic, so I was living in London for like 4.5 years essentially, and now the pandemic's happened. It's forced me to come back home. Well, it did force me initially, and then after that, like, I've just kind of stayed here out of choice. It's now been over 2 years now since I've been back home, and it's kind of give me some grounding as well, because being in London as well, you kind of get sucked away in the whole kind of rat race of things, because it's an ever fast moving city, and you kind of get like self absorbed into it as well. But then like coming back home is kind of me realize again about my own kind of motivations as well, and my journey of what I want to do as well. So one thing I've always wanted to think about is like, how can I help my wider community now with the knowledge I've gained? So one thing that came to mind was this show itself. So I was approached by Yusuf Malik, shout out to him, that like, Ramdan Radio, we're running it this year, do you want to host a show? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll host a show. And so I call it Going Beyond Wolverhampton. So it's kind of a way of speaking to people. So the whole aim is this show is maybe aimed towards people who like young adults away. And I was going to bring on people who are maybe from the area or not, like, and they could talk about their own experiences as well. And so this can kind of like tell people or inspire people to go and do their own thing as well. So that's one thing that I was thinking of doing. And then another thing, like, it's not I was necessarily thinking of doing, it's more so like one way I could go about trying to achieve my goals. Another thing I'm thinking of doing as well is perhaps, say, starting like a mentorship scheme. So last year for Going Beyond Wolverhampton, I interviewed one of my good friends, Adnan. So he's from Blackburn. And Blackburn in a way is very similar to Wolverhampton in the way that it's now like a very disadvantaged city compared to London, and trying to bring opportunities there. So he managed to start like a mentoring scheme there. So he called it the Zenith Project. So rather than like wasting money on tuition, for example, he'll speak with children in the local area and just give them like one-to-one mentoring, and give the session like once a month. And he when I spoke to him on the show last year, he just started a project. But unfortunately, as time has gone by, the project has kind of stagnated because he himself has got a lot more busier. And so he hasn't got as much time to put into the project. So I realised that like if I want to make a project like this, it kind of needs to be sustainable and needs to survive without me being there as well. So one thing I do is I do want to start a mentorship scheme, and we're just people from like Wolves or like people who moved away from there, like just people, because unfortunately like I was lucky that I went to a good school, so I went to Adams Grammar, where I had a lot of like facilities and resources available to me as well. Whereas unfortunately, I've seen the difference that like just going to a different school can make a lot of difference. So my younger brother, he went to St. Peter's, and St. Peter's itself is still a very good school in its own right, and compared to a lot of other schools in Wolverhampton especially. But again, like the opportunities I was presented with and the opportunities he was very different. And I found, for example, like my school like pushed me to do like extra things as well. Like they even applied me like to do certain subjects and apply to certain universities. Whereas my brother never really had that from his school, and like it's kind of me and like my parents who have to like kind of convince him that he could do like better than what he was doing. And so that's one thing that I want to kind of encourage other people to do as well. Because one thing like I've always wanted to do is teaching, because I feel like I'm not sure like being a teacher, right? You're kind of like the the role model for the kids in your class. And so it's something that I would have loved to do, but I don't think the teaching profession in this country, unfortunately, is kind of dead-ended. And unfortunately, you're given a lot of like unnecessary responsibility. Because if people see teaching, right, like, oh yeah, you get a lot of holiday, it's a lot more relaxed compared to other jobs. But unfortunately, with teaching as well, like you're given like the pastoral side of things as well, where you actually need to look after a bunch of children as well and guide them in their life. So it's not something I see myself doing full time. It's something I've managed to pick up part time though. So in 2020, my old university, Two Kings, they put out a call for like graduate teaching assistants. So I asked if I could be one. So for the past like year and a half, well 2 years now even, I've been helping out as a teaching assistant there. So I give lectures, I give tutorials to university students actually in mathematics, in mathematical biology, in statistics, so in a variety of things. And I find that quite interesting as well, because you get to again interact with young adults on a one-to-one level, and it's kind of so about like obviously you could talk about your studies and so on as well, but you can kind of give general advice as well, and that's something I've kind of enjoyed doing, especially this year as well, because now it's all in person again. So it's one thing that forced me to get out of the house. So I need to go to King's like once a week now on a Friday, where I give a tutorial and lecture in the morning, and so just having that interaction with like young adults and kids is quite nice to have. And so yeah, so one thing, going back to my original point, like what I want to do going forward is that like I do want to start like a kind of a mentorship scheme within Wolverhampton, and obviously you need mentors as well to kind of help you with that. So just a kind of like a call to help or call to action per se. That if you're interested in starting this up or like getting involved, like I have a plan set up as it is, but I need to ensure this plan is sustainable without me just physically being here, because I'm not the only person who's going to be here, and I'm not the only one who's had my experience, because my experience is very unique and other people's experience is unique as well. So it'd be good to get like other people on board as well. So this is a call to action. If anyone's actually interested in getting involved, do email. So conveniently, I've got an email set up called goingbeyondwolverhampton@gmail.com. So drop me an email or contact Random Radio and get in touch with me. And if you're interested in starting such a scheme, because it's something that I want to do, but I think I just need more manpower to get it off the ground. I've gone in touch with my old school and other schools as well, see if they're interested as well. But I think I need a better framework as well before I can kind of set it off. So, kind of going back now, how I've talked about a lot now for the past hour. I'm kind of impressed how I've managed to sort this, because normally it's just me asking the question. So I've got an easy job, I ask the question, someone says something, I can follow up with a question. But now it's just being me talking to myself now for like an hour or so. So going back to it, so like I always ask people like 2 questions: what advice would you give myself from 5 years ago, and what advice would I give myself where do I see myself in 5 years' time? So if I spoke to myself back when I was 18, so like back when I first started university, what would I tell myself? I'd also say like just kind of be aware of the bigger picture around you. It's very easy to kind of get caught up in what's around you and so on, and kind of fall to peer pressure and just general pressure around you, and don't fall to that level. Remember what you want to do and what interests you, and kind of stay along those like lines. It's very easy to kind of get worked up or like perfectionist about things, but just kind of put that to one side and just focus on the bigger picture. And there are going to be hiccups along the way, but that doesn't matter though. You are going to make mistakes. Like I made a lot of mistakes as well. So for like my journey through university was far from smooth. But yeah, alhamdulillah, I've got to where I am. I'm quite happy where I am as well. So just kind of maintain that. And in 5 years' time as well, my aim is that maybe I probably would have moved to London by then, I reckon, on a full time. But again, my longer plan is I've just come back to Wolverhampton. So after I've gained enough experience there. But having said that, I don't necessarily think I will be in London, because as remote working has happened, perhaps I can just stay in Wolverhampton and kind of see things from here. So, yeah, and maybe I've done a PhD by then as well, so I can finally be a doctor and say to my parents, hey, you're finally happy that I am one. So yeah, that's one thing as well to look out for in the future. And yeah, I think I've given my 2 3 cents on my life and what I can tell you guys. So yeah, I'm actually going to finish off a bit early, but hopefully that's fine. So yeah, this is the last show for Ramadan. So hope the rest of Ramadan goes well for you, and inshallah, your prayers all get answered and any wishes for next year come true. And wishing all a happy Eid next week as well. So signing out for this year, Akmal. Okay,